The bilateral relationship between Nigeria and the United States of America remains unwavering and intact. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country and the United States' second largest trade partner and third largest destination for U.S. foreign direct investment in Africa, and routinely ranks among the top recipients of American aid globally. By virtue of the country's size and influence, it is the largest African diaspora group in the United States. Notwithstanding, many American policy and aid objectives in Africa arguably are linked to a significant extent to developments in Nigeria. Security, governance, and human rights concerns in Nigeria have drawn congressional attention and posed challenges for U.S. engagement. However, President Tinubu has impressed investors and rating agencies with a series of far-reaching economic reforms, but public discontent has mounted over rising costs and declining purchasing power, and prospects for its economic agenda remain uncertain. Joining us now on the morning show as we look at the depth and breadth of the U.S.-Nigeria bilateral relationship in the 6-month mark of President Tinubu's administration is David Greene, U.S. Embassy Charge d'Affaires in Nigeria. Good morning, Mr. Greene, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, quickly, let me ask you, one, what are the highlights of U.S.-Nigeria bilateral relations? And then increasingly, we've seen other countries moving into this African space, not just the Nigerian space. Today, you have U.S.-France summit, France-Africa summit, Saudi-Africa summit, Japan-Africa summit. Does that bother the United States? And also with, for example, Nigeria reaching out to the Middle East, to parts of Europe, to Asia, and yet, America looks like a major ally of Nigeria.
Thank you for that question. Well, first of all, let me just harken back to what happened a little bit less than a year ago at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., when President Biden committed to deepening our engagement with the continent of Africa in just about every sector you can imagine, but with a special focus on areas like trade and investment, health and human security, food security, making sure that African voices are elevated in global conversations. So in the Nigerian context, of course, as you mentioned in your run-up, as has been said, as President Biden said at that summit, Africa's success is the world's success, and as he has subsequently said, Nigeria's success is the world's success, because as Africa's largest population, democracy, and economy, what happens in Nigeria is going to have impacts for the region, for the continent, and well beyond. So we're very proud of our very productive partnership with Nigeria, and we do so much in every sector. Today being World AIDS Day, let me mention for a moment what we've done over the years on HIV/AIDS, for example. In the 2 decades since PEPFAR has been around, we've invested $8 billion in Nigeria, which has led to a point where we're on the verge of epidemic control. We're going to meet UN targets for HIV/AIDS control by 2025. We've got 1.6 million Nigerians on life-saving drugs. So that's just one aspect of how productive this partnership is. And when we look at, of course, we believe firmly that sort of international ties and close relations between all countries are really vital for growth, for development, people-and-people exchanges. That's where the United States and Nigeria really excel. So the fact that Nigeria is building its ties around the world, it just makes sense. It's good for Nigeria, it's good for Africa, it's good for the world that there be more trade, more interaction, and an elevated African presence in global institutions.
All right, so let's talk about the views as regards economic ties and some of the things President Tinubu has been doing.
Well, we're certainly supportive of what President Tinubu has been trying to do in terms of putting Nigeria on a stronger economic footing. We had, for example, our Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wale Adeyemo, was in Nigeria a couple of months ago, and he engaged on these economic issues, and he pointed out that Nigeria's potential, it's not its oil, it's its people. And so it's a question about how do you mobilize the kind of investment, the kind of trade to create the jobs, provide the opportunity so that Nigerian citizens can meet their aspirations and flourish. And that's something that we believe very strongly. If you have the right macroeconomic framework in place, you have good fiscal management, and you make a strong commitment to tackling corruption, these are the kinds of things that can unleash the Nigerian economy, draw the kind of investment that's going to create jobs and that's going to lead to economic growth and prosperity for all Nigerians, and it's going to have impacts well beyond just Nigeria.
By the way, you mentioned Wale Adeyemo. Nigerians were very excited when he visited, considering the fact that Adeyemo is a Nigerian name and it's considered to be one of us, even here in Nigeria. That linkage.
If I may say, one of the areas that we committed to working on at the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit was more engagement with the diaspora. And so, of course, Wale Adeyemo, he represents, the full flourishing of an extraordinary human being who brings Nigeria and the United States together in his person. And the administration recently announced the establishment of our advisory council of diaspora members, of whom I think there are 2 members of Nigerian origin. So we're really working hard to try and make sure that we are engaging. You mentioned that the 500,000 person strong Nigerian diaspora in the United States. We're really doing everything we can to make sure that we're working with the Nigerian and the African diaspora for the benefit of the continent and the United States.
Let's talk about tech. Many U.S. tech giants coming to Nigeria, Microsoft, Google, Cisco. What role do you think that technology can play in strengthening Nigeria-U.S. bilateral relations?
Well, it's already playing a remarkable role. And as you said, we've got U.S. tech giants investing here because they see the opportunity, they see the talent that's present in Nigeria. And they're also a catalyst for an incredible amount of investment. I think I saw a statistic that 25% of all the venture capital coming into the continent comes to Nigeria. And that speaks to the potential that sector offers for the kind of productive trade and investment and job creation. I think it's also worth pointing out that those U.S. tech giants are also training. They're training young Nigerians, women, to find good jobs in the tech sector. So it's having these knock-on effects. So I think that another statistic that we like to cite is that the oil and gas sector these days produces about 7% of Nigeria's GDP. The tech sector is about 18%. So when you think about the potential impact that tech, fintech, telecoms are going to have on Nigeria's future growth and the course of development of this country and the provision of jobs for its citizens, it's going to be immense, and the United States is very excited to partner in that space.
So let's also talk about collaborations as regards one, climate change COP that's going on currently as we speak, and also the agricultural sector, because we need to be able to double agricultural productivity in the country. We have so much potential, but we're kicking way below our belt.
Yeah. Well, looking at what we're doing in the partnership, a couple of examples. USAID has put more than $200 million in the last 5 years into the ag sector to try and create opportunities for farmers, to bring markets to farmers, to improve productivity through technology, through availability of resources. And in fact, I was present at the launch of a $22 million 5-year program that's intended to help the cocoa sector and the entire value chain improve productivity. And folks may not know, cocoa is the second highest export earner for Nigeria when it comes to foreign exchange. So it's a hugely important sector. So we're investing in that regard, and I think there's obviously tremendous potential in the agricultural sector. And of course, food security is a focus that's on everybody's mind. So we're doing a lot in that space. And we've devoted about $17 billion globally to food security resources over the last couple of years around the world. So a sector that we also take very seriously. COP28, of course, Nigeria is both a leading energy producer, of course, and a country that is so tremendously impacted by the climate crisis that we're going through right now. So that's another area in which we have a whole panoply of programs that we're working on with Nigerians to try and mitigate the impact of climate change, to try and help Nigeria make the transition to cleaner power. And then, of course, we're having a lot of engagements at
What are some of
COP28.
those programs?
I'm sorry?
What are some of those programs?
Well, we have Power Africa is our flagship program, and I think the figure that we use there is that over the years we put $90 million into Nigeria to try and help with that transition, to try and connect more households to the grid or to bring them power. But it's really not about the U.S. government assistance in this area. It's about mobilizing the private sector. Ultimately, and I think in that area, people see the opportunities in Nigeria because there's an incredible demand for power, and we want to help Nigeria supply that power and supply it in a clean manner. And I think the investment will come when the circumstances are propitious.
Okay, you mentioned COP28.
Yeah.
Although that's not the question I want to ask you. I was just surprised that the loss and damage fund that was agreed upon yesterday, and the details being worked out now, that the U.S. is just contributing, has made a pledge of $17 million, when Germany is promising $100 million, UAE is promising $100 million. But the question I wanted to ask you is about security, which is a major concern for Nigerians. Banditry, kidnapping, terrorism. If you could take us through, what the U.S. and Nigeria are doing together at the bilateral level in the area of security cooperation.
Sure. Let me just mention on the first point, our special presidential envoy for climate, John Kerry, has said that we know that the United States bears a special responsibility, and we're doing a lot on climate. We're going to mobilize a lot of funds, investment funds, climate finance, to try and help the world overcome the challenges we face. On security, of course, everywhere I've worked in my career, security is the top thing. The citizens need to feel secure. Businesses need to feel secure that they're going to be able to succeed. And so the United States and Nigeria have a very deep partnership in that area as well. For example, we provide resources and assistance to help train the Nigerian military on how to provide better maritime security, or how to deal with car bombs and improvised explosive devices. Of course, the Nigerian military is using very effectively the A-29 Super Tucanos that Nigeria bought a few years ago to deal with bandits, with terrorists, Boko Haram, ISIS, West Africa. So that's one aspect of it, but there's also the civilian security side, right? It's not just about the military. So we work very closely with the police, with all the different Nigerian civilian security institutions and agencies to help enhance their capacity to interdict illegal drugs, to ensure accountability and human rights protections in the various security forces. And that's an area that's immensely important to us, immensely important to Nigeria, and something that we work on very closely together.
Let's talk about the creative sector. Nigeria has a very big creative sector, one of the biggest film industries in the world, music, arts. There's a resurgence of Afrobeat. Yeah. It's pop culture now. You see Nigeria, about 5 Nigerian stars nominated for the Grammy Awards in America. And you can see them doing so well. What is that connection like? And also, would also like to talk about in terms of infrastructure. So I want you to take on the creative sector and also physical infrastructure on ground. What has been the partnership like?
We're gonna get the whole Nigerian economy in this conversation. On the creative side, very exciting, of course, very exciting. Let me just harken back for a second to the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, because I was talking about sort of making sure that African voices are present and part of global conversations. And in some ways that refers to the diplomatic conversation, right? We advocated for the African Union to have a seat at the G20 meeting this year. But what's really remarkable is how Nigerians are telling Nigeria's story through the creative sector. As you said, movies, film, it's both a tremendous opportunity for economic growth. We see Netflix, Amazon, they're investing, they're doing production here. But as you said, the visibility of Afrobeats, the visibility of African artists is just skyrocketing globally, and especially in the United States. And those kinds of people-to-people ties, that's really what this is about. It's about that connection. It's about feeling that you are having the kind of relationship with another country, with another people that's meaningful. And I think both as a source of economic growth and as a way that brings our countries together, the incredible dynamism of the creative sector in Nigeria is really something. And it's also something we try and support through U.S. government programs. But again, that's the private sector that's really going to drive that, and it's about people's tastes, and it's about cultural exchange.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, yes. Another huge issue. Of course, it is widely known. I mean, Nigeria has an enormous infrastructure deficit, and it needs to work on that. Globally, the United States, we've launched something through the G7 that's called the Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment. The goal is to try and mobilize about $600 billion or more in infrastructure investment. And again, this is one of those sectors where governments can help, prime the pump. But we've got to drive foreign investment. It's got to be private sector investment that's going to bring deliver the infrastructure that Nigeria needs. And that gets back to, again, those fundamentals. You've got to create an enabling environment, a business environment of transparency, of accountability, of where you're making sure that corruption isn't getting in the way of all business transactions. That's the kind of macroeconomic foundation, stability and predictability when it comes to foreign exchange. Those are the kinds of steps that are going to build that foundation that's going to allow for investment and economic growth and achieving the infrastructure development.
Well, let's talk about education. Many Nigerians studying in the United States in various colleges at various levels. Only last year, one report stated that over 17,000 Nigerians gained admission into schools in the U.S. And back home here, when our brothers in the diaspora come home, they boast that Nigerians probably have the largest number of educated immigrants with PhDs in the United States. So it's a major area of cooperation between the US and Nigeria. But there's also this complaint that to get visa to go and study in the US is a major issue. We would like to address that.
I'm glad you asked, because it is an important, and I know it's a concern for a lot of Nigerians. So yes, last year, over 17,000 Nigerians went to the United States to study. That makes Nigeria the 7th largest sending country in the world and the #1 on the continent. So that's something, again, that speaks to the strength of our bilateral relationship. What a lot of folks don't know is that, this year, for example, we've interviewed over 30,000 student applicants. And over 115,000 tourist visa applicants. So there's a fundamental problem, a challenge here, which is it's math. The demand for visa appointments exceeds the supply that we could possibly offer. But we've worked very, very hard to get the backlog down. It's much reduced. If you're a student seeking a visa to the United States for the first time, you're probably not going to have to wait more than a month. We put a lot of measures in place to try and expedite appointments for those that truly need them. And one major change that we made back in March was we extended the validity of most Nigerian visas to 5 years from 2. So in addition to that bringing a lot of benefit for the individual who gets that visa, because they can come and go for 5 years, it will reduce that wait time because fewer people will have to renew. Instead of renewing every 2 years, you renew every 5. So from that vantage point, we're really working hard to get those wait times down. But I will, if I may speak to your audience for a moment, if you're planning on applying for a visa, do apply early, plan ahead.
How about the Dropbox system? What is it like now?
We're able pretty much to keep up with Dropbox, which is sort of what we call our interview waiver program. If you've had a visa that has been used, correctly, and it's expired, I think we've extended for a couple of years at least 1 year.
What do you mean by used correctly? Underline used correctly.
If you haven't overstayed your visa, if you haven't used it to conduct affairs in the United States that are not under the grounds of what that visa was issued on. So there are different criteria. Then you can, in many circumstances, renew your visa without having to come in for an interview. So that's another channel that we use to try and reduce the backlog and get visas to people that are qualified for them.
Okay. Well, you published an op-ed recently. Do you want to talk about the issues in that opinion piece?
I was inspired to write that piece by the approach of the 1 year anniversary of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit and the 6-month anniversary of the Tinubu administration being in power, to talk about all the different areas in which we cooperate and the optimism and the energy that we as Americans working here and as Americans representing U.S. interests in Nigeria, the optimism and the positive energy that we see for this relationship going forward. all the different areas in which we cooperate, whether it's health and human security, whether it's physical security, whether it's economic growth, power, agriculture, all these topics that we've discussed this morning. We are very enthusiastic about it. And we understand that a lot of Nigerians are hurting right now because the economic dislocation is very real, and people are struggling. But the measures that the Tinubu administration has been taking to try and put the economy on the right footing, to try and increase the transparency and increase the predictability of the business environment are really important, and we are going to do everything we can to support the success of those policies. Last point I'll make is that we also think that you can't. We've talked a lot about economics, but you can't overlook the governance aspect of it. Countering corruption, weeding out corruption, ensuring better transparency and accountability in government and in security forces, ensuring that the electoral process has integrity. These are all areas that are very, very important to secure Nigeria's future and let it play the role that it needs to play for the benefit of its citizens, for the region, and for the continent and well beyond.
Still on, ensuring integrity in the electoral process, the U.S. government has always sounded off as regards the electoral process, and at some point some key political actors, have been, shown some very hard decisions by the U.S. as regards their visa. What would you like to say about that?
Well, we have announced a couple of times this year. Well, let me start from basic principles, right? As two great federal republics, the United States and Nigeria have a lot in common, and one of those is that we really prize the electoral process and the democratic processes that allow for citizens
peaceful transfer of power.
Peaceful transfer of power for citizens to choose their leaders. Absolutely, it's essential. And when we have credible information that somebody has undermined the democratic process, whether it's ballot box stuffing or intimidating voters or intimidating journalists, we're going to take action. And as we've announced a couple of times, we have imposed travel sanctions, travel bans on visa restrictions on individuals that we have concluded have undermined the democratic process.
How can you broaden the reporting channels so that people are able to report more of this ballot box stuffing that you guys might not be able to catch a glimpse of? Because that's really important, because, suffice to say, the last elections were really very curious cases, across the state of the elections that happened in this by-elections, as it were. How do people have more reporting channels?
Well, as we do in every field, we work very, very closely with Nigerian civil society organizations. And during the elections back in the spring, I went and visited a lot of the observatories and monitoring centers. And the young Nigerians are out there, the political party observers are out there, and they are doing the work of citizens in a democracy, which is trying to hold their government accountable. And so at the end of the day, it's not about what the United States is doing with visa bans. It's about how are the Nigerian citizens holding the government accountable, and how are Nigerian leaders, elected leaders and community leaders, how are they demanding accountability from themselves and from others?
Well, thank you very much, David Greene, Chartered Affair of the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us on The Morning Show.